You got up, you stretched your legs, you drank some water. All right, let's go on to our third part of chapter 5. Oops, I forgot to set up the thing. Give me just 1 second. We're going to do the presentation, but we're going to swap display settings, and then we're going to get rid of this one so that my third screen isn't messed up. Open this back up. Yeah. All right. Oh no, it started me all the way back here. Well, while we're going down, we know that we've gone over consumer surplus and we've gone over producer surplus today. And then we started looking at total surplus and deadweight loss that happens when we have overproduction or underproduction in a market. Wow, can you believe we've covered this many slides today? Just keep scrolling, just keep scrolling. Do students today watch Finding Nemo? It was a great movie. You should watch Finding Nemo if you haven't. All right, so underproduction, overproduction, and then sources of market failure. So we talked about the fact that we have overproduction and underproduction, but where does it even come from? These market failures where the quantity that we have may not be equal to what our efficient quantity is, or maybe our price that we're at isn't equal to what our efficient price is, you know, the one right in the middle of supply and demand. We may not be there, and there's some sort of reason why that typically might happen. So in competitive markets, there's a few reasons why we might have these different sorts of failures arise. There's price and quantity regulations, there's taxes and subsidies, there's externalities, public goods, common resources, monopoly, extra costs. So many. All right, so let's talk about the first one, prices and quantity regulations. Price regulations is putting a block on the price, right? This is the idea that maybe it's really efficient for scrunchies to be $1, and that's where society would like it to be. But maybe I come in as the government and I say, no, you can't charge more than 10 cents. It takes me 20 cents to make this, right? So maybe I don't produce anymore if we have this sort of price regulation. It's a block on price adjustments. It either says that a price has to be this high, so maybe the price of a scrunchie has to be $4 and we can't go less than that, or the price is so that you can't go up anymore, and maybe it has to be 10 cents and I can't go any higher. Well, either way, that's keeping me from getting to the efficient amount of scrunchies, which might be some quantity for $1. So these price regulations put a block on what we can do with prices. On the other hand, we have quantity regulations. This regulates or limits the amount that we have. So we see this a lot with the farm industry, right? Because we tend to put quantity limits on the amount of crops to keep their prices artificially high. If we let everybody produce as much wheat as they possibly wanted, wheat would cost pennies on the dollar, if that, and the prices would completely tank, which isn't good for farmers because then they have to produce even more and more and more and more and more. But quantity regulations also have their whole mess behind it too. So we're going to explore that over the next couple weeks. So quantity regulations is putting a limit on the amount. So maybe it says that you can only produce 400 bales of hay, or you have to produce at least 800 bales of hay. It's some sort of quantity regulation that either gives you a minimum amount to produce or a maximum amount to produce. Okay, then we also have the idea of taxes and subsidies. Taxes and subsidies are actually a form of market failure. Let's think about why. So we have a price and quantity where we would like to operate, and we're really happy at that price and quantity. But when we add in a tax, it kind of makes that good more expensive, right? If I go to the store and I'm going to go buy, I don't know, a book. Let's say that I'm going to go buy a book. This is codename Verity. Apparently, I haven't started reading it yet, but apparently it's pretty good. It's about British spy planes back in 1943 and a really cool friendship that develops in during. Okay, anyways, so let's say that I want to go get a book. Well, this book says it's $9.99, but that's not really what I pay at the register, right? I go, I check out, I hand this to the person, they tell me how much it is, and they say $10.43. I'm just giving them a number. Well, now this price, this $9.99, this might be at the quantity and the price that's efficient in the market. But the taxes that I pay at the register make it so that this is now more expensive for me. It's like a price regulation because it increases the price of something, which means that our quantity is going to be off from what we would otherwise be. Subsidies are the opposite. Subsidies kind of lower the price. Maybe let's say, openness to creative destruction. This one's a book about innovation dynamism, so essentially entrepreneurship. One of my friends wrote, so I was going to read it and leave them a review on Amazon. Anyways, so Openness to creative destruction. Maybe they really want people to read this, right? So maybe we start to give out a subsidy. This is, oh, it doesn't have a price on it. Let's say, I don't know, let's say like $50. So this is $50. $50 is a lot. I don't know if you've gone book shopping lately, but I don't like paying $50. So maybe instead what we do is we go around and we try to subsidize. Maybe we try to get more people to read this book because it's really interesting research on entrepreneurship, and we want more people to read it because it can help inform policy. So maybe we subsidize them. And we go around and we give everybody a $5 coupon. Well, now this is cheaper, right? To me, it's now $45 instead of $50. So I'm like, oh, that's great. Well, in society, this shifts the price down. What happens when price goes down? We tend to buy more of it, which is good. We sell more. That means we're not at our efficient price and quantity anymore. A subsidy, which lowers the price, changes the system. And that in itself is a type of market failure too, because now that might mean that we have an overproduction of books. Because too many of us want these right now, right? Or an underproduction. Yeah, underproduction. Because maybe they're cheaper. And because they're cheaper, we want more of them. But there's not the efficient quantity that had been set out by the original price. So taxes make things more expensive. Subsidies make them cheaper. Either way, that's taking us away from where our efficient price and quantity would be in the middle of the graph where demand matches supply. All right, then we have the idea of externalities. Externality is a fancy word for some sort of pollution, right? It's an extra little bit of good or an extra little bit of bad that happens to someone other than the seller and the buyer. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I'm producing paper. Okay, and I have a paper plant, and maybe I throw all my pollution out into the waterways because I'm producing paper. Well, me buying and selling paper to Scranton, Pennsylvania, we just kind of base it upon what my cost to produce are and what their willingness to pay is, and we come up with our solution. What we don't consider in that price and quantity is the damage that might be done from all of my pollution in the river. It could be that thousands of people lose their homes. It could be that the water's polluted. It could be that there's less fish now. So there's a cost to society. And this cost to society makes it so that society would actually prefer that I produce less paper than what me and Dunder Mifflin are trying to work out, right? We're trying to work out an amount of paper, but if we had thought about what happened to society, we would have actually reduced the amount and increased the price. Externalities can be this extra little bit of cost. Now, we have that on the producer side. We also have it on the consumer side when we're consuming something. But externalities, notice what I say here. I say it's a cost or benefit. Let's think of a benefit. Okay, so I like this one bead company, and this bead company, what they do is they make their beads out of like trash in the ocean, and they like repurpose a lot of the stuff to make these really cute little beads. Well, when we're negotiating price, when they're selling me these cool beads, I'm paying a price based upon the beads. They're selling me something based upon how much it costs them to produce the beads. What neither one of us are considering is how better off society is, because then there's less ocean trash, right? Because something's getting done with it. The oceans are cleaner. Society would actually prefer there be more beads because then there's less ocean trash. So that might mean that there's some sort of benefit that's happening that we're not accounting for when we're getting to our equilibrium price and quantity. That's a type of market failure too. When society would prefer us to have more or less than what we as individual producers and buyers are agreeing to, right? There's a disconnect there. And that in itself is a market failure because it means that there's an overproduction or an underproduction happening. All right. So what we call this is an external cost or an external benefit. So if extra bad's happening to society that I'm not considering because I'm not one of those people who are getting harmed, that's an external cost. That's a cost to society. It's a cost externally. Okay. If the oceans are cleaner, that's an external benefit. There's some sort of benefit happening to society that's not necessarily happening to me. It's happening to society. This is an external benefit. It's a benefit externally. Okay. When there's external cost, we have overproduction. We're producing more than what society would like us to. If there's a lot of pollution and damage, society would like us to lower the amount and charge more for it. If there's an external benefit, so for example, we're cleaning the oceans, well, then society would like us to have more. They would actually like us to produce more and lower the price. So there's an underproduction in that case. It's just figuring out the difference in between society and us personally. So overproduction, underproduction. Let's talk about public goods and common resources. I'm not going to go super into this because we're going to get really deep in it, I think in chapter 16, later on within this set. So a public good benefits everyone and no one can be excluded from its benefits. This means we're going to have two concepts we're going to talk about later on. The first is going to be excludability. The second one's going to be rival. If something's non-excludable, this means I can't stop someone from using it. I can't stop someone from using the public park. I can stop someone if it's an excludable good. For example, if they didn't pay for a movie ticket, they can't get into the movie. I can exclude them. So that's sort of the difference there. Then we have rivalrous. If someone else is using the park, that doesn't affect my ability to use the park. That's non-rivalrous. If I'm using this scrunchie, that affects someone else's ability to use the same scrunchie. So this is rivalrous. There's a difference between this. The goods that are non-rivalrous, non-excludable. So I can't stop anybody from using it, and them using it doesn't affect my ability to use it. Well, that causes a problem. Why would anyone ever pay for that? If you don't pay for it and I can't stop you from using it and it doesn't affect anyone else's ability to use it, why would you pay for it? So we have a lot of things that happen with public goods specifically, which if you like public goods and you think they're interesting, I teach the public classes. So I teach 345 and I teach 445 where we get really in depth into what this actually means and figure out policy. But anyways, this is called the free rider problem. Sometimes people won't pay for the public goods because why? Which means that there's an underproduction. We end up not having as many parks as what society would like us to have because there's just a lot of people who refuse to pay for the parks because why should they pay for the parks? A common resource is slightly different. A common resource is something that's owned by no one but can be used by anyone. Let's think about the Norwegian fishing industry. So one of my friends actually studies this and it's really super cool, right? So they had a problem where there was one type of fish that was available in one specific area and then all the boats would come and they would fish for that. Well, the thing is, the first boat would come and take 100. The second boat would come and take 100. The third boat would come and take 100. They don't think about, should we leave enough fish to have, for them to have little baby fish and to have more fish next time? They just say, oh, I want all the fish to sell to my customers. Then something happens called the tragedy of the commons. That's things like overfishing, overhunting, deforestation. When there's an overuse of a scarce resource because it's not really owned by anyone, so no one's taking responsibility for it, and they overuse it. This is called tragedy of the commons. It's when we have an overproduction that's going to end up hurting us in the long term because we have less of a scarce resource. But like I said, I'm going to go back into that. All right, then we have the idea of monopolies. Let me tell you a secret about economists. I don't know how many of y'all hang out with the econ professors or how many of y'all will be econ professors or how many of y'all will get your masters or be econ majors if you decide to be econ majors. But one thing that you will eventually learn about people who study economics for a living is do not bring monopoly to that party. Just don't, right? It's banned in every econ friend group I have ever had because if you bring it, tables get flipped, people yell and they get upset and then they're really mad and then you don't talk to one of your friends for 4 years through grad school and to this day you're still mad even if they're teaching in a school in Florida and you're teaching in Illinois and you're still just really mad about it. Don't bring monopoly to a party. Anyways, that's a sidebar. That's a sidebar. Okay, a monopoly is when there's only one person producing a good, right? So let's say it's iPhones. There's only one company producing iPhones. They used to be the only company producing smartphones at all because they developed the first smartphone. But they're the only provider of the iOS devices. Well, what does that mean? This means that if they're the only one producing it, they have a self-interest piece there, right? They're like, you know what I can do? I can raise the price. I can charge a little bit more. I'm going to sell less of them, but I can charge a little bit more than what society wants me to charge. And I can make more money. This self-interested goal of monopolies actually make it so we have an underproduction. They tend to produce a little bit less so that they can keep prices artificially high and not necessarily the amount that would have been produced if they were perfectly competitive. That's another one that we're going to go through later in the course because that's a really big subject of our third section. All right, then there's the idea of transaction costs. Transaction costs are the opportunity cost of making trades. Going to Walmart doesn't cost me very much. I can go there and I can buy a lamp. Transaction costs are low. What does it cost me to make that transaction? It costs me driving over there, taking like an hour out of my day and walking through the shelves. Now, what if the transaction costs were higher? What if I was buying a lamp and they were only sold in one neighborhood in China, and I had to fly there and I had to hire an interpreter to be able to interpret for me, and then I had to hire like currency exchanging services to get my money in the local currency, and notice that some of these are increasing transaction costs. To be able to buy that lamp would start to cost me a lot of money. So transaction costs can be low or they can be high, and that really depends on the function of the market, right? Some markets are just too costly to operate. It's way too costly for me to go and hire a translator and buy a lamp from a small neighborhood in China. Like that just, it's way too costly for it to actually happen. When transaction costs are high like that, then the market will underproduce. It technically might be better off for the market if some of us were able to buy those lamps, but sometimes it's just too expensive to. So we have underproduction because the transaction costs are high. All right, then we have alternatives to the market. So when a market is inefficient, can one of the non-market methods of allocation do better? Remember, we started off this entire chapter by talking about other things we can do besides price. So instead of market price, we can have a command system, or instead of market price, we can have a lottery system or a contest. Most of the time, we tend to use majority rule when we're thinking about things, right? Majority rule has its own shortcomings. A group that pursues self-interest of its members can become a majority, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it represents everyone. I mean, we see that with voting all the time, right? A majority of people might get what they want, but that doesn't mean it necessarily votes or it doesn't represent everyone's thoughts and feelings. So voters must be translated into actions by bureaucrats. So notice you might feel certain ways about policies, and then you're voting for someone that hopefully feels similarly on some policies, but there's no politician that's going to agree with you 100% on every single thing, right? So you're voting for someone who you're voting for them in the hopes that they'll do an action or something else, and that action might have an effect on your life. This is not a very efficient system sometimes. So can the competitive markets in themselves be efficient when which buyers and sellers work together for something? Well, there's no one efficient mechanism for allocating resources. If prices were the best way to do it, we would only have prices. If command systems were the only way to do it, we'd only have command systems. We have lots of different ways to allocate resources, and that's because it takes a lot of things to actually become efficient. Sometimes we need majority rule, and we need to bypass inside firms. So inside the firms, we need a manager who tells the duty managers, who tells the people how to make something, and then that stuff needs to go to the market, and people need to pick it up and go to the register, and first come, first serve on buying it at the register, and then all of these pieces together, these different types of allocation mechanisms all working together. Now we can do a pretty good job. We can actually do an amazing job when we start working together. So with a lot of this, we talked about equity. Now we also need to talk about equality, because it's actually a very, very interesting and pervasive part of the underpinnings of economics. So there's two general opinions, right? In economics, I do not ask you to form an opinion. You can have one or you can have the other, but you need to be able to learn them, right? We're not influencing thought. Remember, we're taking, instead of normative statements, the I feel statements, we're going to be taking the scientific statements of I need a testable implication. I need to be able to test this idea. Now, there are two different ideas that we would like to test in economics, and this results to fairness. So one is the idea of the fairness of results. That's what happens, like everyone can kind of start their own place in life, but at the very end, we're going to take everybody's stuff, put it in a pile, and then divide it by the number of people, and then give the exact amount to everyone, because the fairness in the results of what happens in their lives has to be the same. That's one version. The second version is the fairness in the rules, where maybe you don't necessarily care where someone ends up, but you want to make sure that they have the same starting place and the same rules. So they have the same education, they have the same access to like a happy household, they have the same access to food and computers. And then what they do after that is up to them. Notice that these are two extremes. That doesn't mean either one of them are right. That doesn't mean either one of them are wrong. It means something in the middle might actually be the most efficient, but we have to know the extremes in economics so that we can best understand everything in the middle too. That's why we study perfectly inelastic and perfectly elastic. It's because it lets us understand the cases that are in between as well. So we have our fairness in the results, where people end up, and we have our fairness in the rules, what they have to work with along the way. So let's talk about first the fairness in results. The idea that only equality brings efficiency is called utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the principle that states to really make an efficient society, we should have the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. And the way it does that is by looking at marginal benefits. If we assume that everybody has the similar extra amount of happiness they get from one more of things, then if someone has two more of something than someone that has zero of something, you take one from the person with two, give it to the person with zero, and then you have someone with one. You keep redistributing like that with everything. Utilitarianism is to the point where income is only equally distributed when it's literally equally distributed. And this has been kind of the idea of redistribution, right? For example, let's say that we have Tom. Tom doesn't have much income, so he's right here, maybe an income of 5. So if his income is 5, then a $6 would actually mean a lot to Tom, right? That's being able to get an additional soda. Like if I have $5 and you give me a $6, I have a whole extra dollar. You just massively increased my well-being or what I can afford. So I have a high marginal benefit of income. Now let's say we have Jerry. Let's say that Jerry has $45. Well, if you give Jerry one extra dollar, that $46 is still good. Like he's still going to be happy with a $46, but the extra bit of happiness he gets from that $46 might be a lower marginal utility than the extra happiness Tom might have gotten from a $6. So what we tend to do in utilitarianism is instead move towards a maximum total benefit, where you take some from Jerry, you give some to Tom until they're about happy in the middle, where their benefits are equal and the income is split. That's the idea of equality in sort of the process, right? Now there's some problems with it too. Utilitarianism ignores the cost of transfers. Notice I said just give stuff from Jerry to Tom. What about the cost there? You'd have to hire someone to go over here and figure out how much Jerry has, and then take some of what Jerry has and then physically move it all the way over to Tom, which might take some time, and there might be some costs associated with that. Then you got to pay that person. Like there's transaction costs. It doesn't all happen simultaneously or smoothly. So it ignores the fact that some of the income is going to leave the system if we make this trade-off. Well, the problem is if we keep trying to redistribute everything over and over and over and over, that's a lot of transaction costs. That is a lot of surplus that leaves the system. So recognizing these could lead to a big difference in between what's efficient and what's fair. Because of this trade-off, John Rawls, who's another popular famous economist over time, proposed that income should be redistributed to the point at which the poorest person is as well as possible, which means that everybody's equal. Now let's think about the other case. So that was the fairness in the results. What about the fairness in the rules? The fairness in the rules essentially says you can go anywhere, do whatever you want in life, but we're going to give you the same playing cards, right? You're going to have the same school, you're going to have the same household, you're going to have the same access to food, the same access to computers, the same access to resources, and like you do with it what you want. And if you end up somewhere you don't like, that's your own fault. If you end up somewhere you do like, that's your own fault. It's the other extreme of this system. So this focus on the fairness of rules is the idea that it's not fair unless the rules are fair. And this is based on a symmetric principle. Symmetric principle in economics just means that it's a requirement that people in similar situations be treated similarly. Okay. In economics, the principle means the economics are the essentially the equity of opportunity, not the equality of income. So it doesn't mean redistributing income at all. It means redistributing opportunity so that everybody has the same ability to make money later on, so that everybody has the same ability to make their lives better. So it tends to have two basic principles when we're starting to focus on the fairness and rules. First is that the state creates and enforces laws that establish the protection of private property. So if this book belongs to me because I worked hard for this book, this is my book, that's private property, right? In a case with no private property, then that means that there's no opportunity with the equality of opportunity for people to be able to buy books if the books don't necessarily belong to anyone, right? Private property might be exchanged from one person to another is the second piece. Oh, I forgot to put a 2 there. Through voluntary exchange. I could sell this book to someone else and they pay me money for it. we can do that. It's kind of the ability to allocate resources to what people believe are the efficient outcome. So there's problems with this as well, right? Because this could be that two people end up in drastically different situations. This could be you have the Jeff Bezos versus someone who can't afford lunch. That might be different paths of their livelihood. So these are, just like I said, the two different extremes of the system. And we're going to talk more and more as we go later on about it. Well, congratulations. We have now gotten all the way through our exploration into the equity and efficiency of economics. So looking at our consumer surplus, our producer surplus, what does that mean for total surplus? What does that mean for all these additional things? How can we allocate resources, and what the two extremes of fairness are in economics? Woo! We've done a lot this time. All right, remember to do your homework, and I'll see you again soon.